With just $200 left in her bank account and an eviction notice burning a hole in her purse, Zara Williams walked into the wrong VIP lounge at Seoul's most exclusive nightclub and caught the attention of a man who controlled the city's shadows. She was supposed to be interviewing for a hostess position on the third floor. Instead, she found herself face to face with the Korean Mafia's most dangerous enforcer. At 24, Zara had been living in Seoul for 8 months, chasing a marketing career that seemed to slip further away with each rejection letter. She was practical, determined, and bilingual, with a business degree from Howard University that was supposed to open doors. Instead, she found herself checking her phone obsessively for job callbacks that never came, watching her savings account dwindle to nothing. Her natural hair was styled in elegant braids that caught the light even in dim spaces, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet strength that came from refusing to give up despite mounting obstacles. She had moved to South Korea with dreams of international business, cultural exchange, and building something meaningful. Now she was 3 days away from losing her tiny studio apartment and considering jobs she never thought she would need. The Lotus nightclub occupied 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower in Gangnam, the kind of place where Seoul's elite came to see and be seen. Zara stood in the marble lobby, checking the text message from the hiring manager for the 5th time. 3rd floor, VIP hostess interview. Ask for Manager Park. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped inside, her only professional dress pressed carefully, her resume folder clutched in hands that barely trembled. She had practiced her Korean introduction 20 times that morning. She needed this job. She needed any job. When the elevator stopped on the 4th floor instead of the 3rd, Zara hesitated. The button panel showed she had pressed 3, but the doors opened to reveal a hallway that was clearly not meant for regular staff interviews. The lighting was warmer here, more intimate. Thick carpeting muffled her footsteps as she stepped out, looking for stairs or another elevator to take her down 1 floor. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling and artwork that looked expensive, museum quality. This was not where hostess interviews happened. She turned left down the corridor, following discreet signs in Korean and English that seemed to point toward what might be an administrative office. Her heels sank slightly into carpet, so plush it felt like walking on clouds. Everything here whispered money and exclusivity. Crystal light fixtures cast soft shadows, and the air itself seemed to carry the scent of expensive cologne and something else, something darker that made her instincts prickle with unease. The hallway opened into a spacious lounge area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seoul skyline. Leather seating arrangements formed intimate conversation areas throughout the space, and a full bar stretched along one wall, staffed by someone who looked more like a bouncer than a bartender. Men in expensive suits occupied several of the seating areas, their conversations conducted in low voices that carried the weight of serious business. This was not the 3rd floor. This was definitely not where she was supposed to be. Zara started to back toward the hallway when one of the men near the windows looked up from his conversation. He was Korean, probably in his 30s, with the kind of sharp, tailored appearance that spoke of serious money. His suit was midnight black, cut so perfectly it looked like it had been sewn directly onto his frame. When their eyes met across the room, she felt something shift in the atmosphere, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Excuse me," she said in her carefully practiced Korean, her voice steady despite the growing sense that she had walked into something far beyond a simple job interview. "I think I am on the wrong floor." The man rose from his seat with fluid grace, and Zara noticed that the other conversations in the room had stopped. Everyone was watching now. He approached with measured steps, his dark eyes never leaving her face, and she found herself frozen in place by the intensity of his attention. He was taller than she had first realized, with sharp cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. Everything about him radiated controlled power, from his perfect posture to the way his presence seemed to fill the space around him. "Which floor were you looking for?" he asked in English, his accent barely detectable. His voice was low, melodic, the kind that commanded attention without requiring volume. "3rd floor," Zara replied, her grip tightening on her resume folder. "I have an interview with Manager Park for a hostess position." Something flickered behind his dark eyes, and she could not tell if it was amusement or calculation. "Manager Park," he repeated thoughtfully. "And you are?" "Zara Williams." She tried to inject confidence into her voice, but standing this close to him, she was acutely aware of the difference between his expensive cologne and her drugstore perfume, between his custom-tailored suit and her department store dress. I should go. I am clearly in the wrong place. Before she could take a step toward the elevator, the main doors opened and 3 more men entered. These newcomers moved differently than the suited men already in the room. They carried themselves like predators, with an edge of barely contained violence that made Zara's skin prickle with alarm. The man in front of her noticed her reaction immediately, his eyes sharpening as he assessed the situation. "Stay exactly where you are," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made her feet root to the floor without conscious thought. "Do not move until I tell you to." The newcomers approached the seating area where the sharp-suited man had been sitting, and Zara watched in growing unease as the previous atmosphere of controlled business shifted into something far more dangerous. Voices rose slightly, still in Korean, but the tone was unmistakably confrontational. She caught fragments of conversation, words that sounded like threats delivered with smiling faces. One of the predatory men glanced in her direction, and Zara felt ice form in her stomach. His eyes lingered on her with an interest that had nothing to do with curiosity and everything to do with calculation. He said something to his companions in rapid Korean, pointing in her direction, and she did not need to understand the words to recognize the menace in his tone. The sharp-suited man stepped slightly to his left, a movement so subtle she almost missed it, but suddenly he was positioned between her and the newcomers. He spoke to them in Korean, his voice carrying the same quiet authority he had used with her, but there was steel underneath now, a warning wrapped in polite words. "What is happening?" Zara whispered, her practical nature warring with an instinct that screamed at her to run. "Business discussion," he replied without turning around. These gentlemen were just leaving. But the newcomers showed no signs of leaving. Instead, the one who had been staring at her pulled out his phone and took a picture, the flash bright in the carefully controlled lighting of the lounge. The sharp-suited man went very still, and Zara felt the temperature in the room drop by several degrees. "That was a mistake," the sharp-suited man said in English, his voice carrying a deadly calm that made every instinct Zara possessed scream danger. The confrontation that followed happened so quickly she barely processed it. The sharp-suited man moved with lethal efficiency, crossing the space to the newcomers in 3 swift strides. There was a brief, intense conversation in Korean, punctuated by what sounded like very specific threats. The man who had taken her picture deleted something from his phone with hands that shook slightly. Within 60 seconds, all 3 newcomers were walking toward the exit with the hurried pace of people who had been thoroughly intimidated. When the doors closed behind them, the sharp-suited man returned to where Zara stood frozen by the windows. The other men in expensive suits had returned to their conversations as if nothing had happened, but she noticed they all kept one eye on their apparent leader. "You should not have seen that," he said, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel like he was cataloging every detail. "More importantly, they should not have seen you." "Who were they?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Competitors," he replied. "And now you are a complication." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, expensive stock paper with minimal text. Kim Tae-young it read, followed by a phone number and nothing else. No company name, no title, just a name and a way to contact him. "My name is Kim Tae-young," he said, confirming what she had just read. "And you, Miss Williams, have just walked into a situation that requires very careful handling." Zara stared at the card in her hands, her mind racing. This was not a hostess interview gone wrong. This was something far more serious, far more dangerous than anything she had ever encountered. The men who had taken her picture, the way everyone deferred to Kim Tae-young, the undercurrent of violence that permeated everything despite the expensive trappings. "I should leave," she said, trying to hand the card back to him. "Yes, you should," Kim Tae-young agreed. "But first, tell me honestly, Miss Williams, how desperate are you for employment?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. She thought about the eviction notice in her purse, the $200 that was supposed to last until her next interview, the growing certainty that she was running out of options in a country where she had no family and few friends. "Very desperate," she admitted, hating how her voice cracked on the words. Kim Tae-young nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Then we will need to have a conversation. But not here, and not today. Keep that card, Miss Williams. When you are ready to discuss alternatives to your current situation, call the number. Alternatives, Zara repeated. Opportunities, he corrected. For someone with your particular combination of skills and circumstances. Before she could ask what he meant, Kim Tae-young gestured toward the elevator. I will have someone escort you to the correct floor for your interview with Manager Park. However, I suspect that after today, you may find conventional employment less appealing than other options. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Zara clutched the business card in her hand and tried to process what had just happened. She had walked into the wrong room and somehow caught the attention of a man who radiated power and danger in equal measure. The way he moved, the way others responded to him, the casual efficiency with which he had handled what looked like a serious threat, all of it pointed to someone operating far outside the boundaries of conventional business. Her interview with Manager Park went smoothly enough. She was offered the hostess position, minimum wage plus tips, working nights in a crowded club where drunk businessmen would expect her to smile and pour drinks and pretend their wandering hands were harmless. It was exactly the kind of job she had sworn she would never take, but it was also the only offer she had received in 2 months of searching. 3 hours later, sitting in her tiny studio apartment with the eviction notice spread on her kitchen table next to Kim Tae-young's business card, Zara stared at her phone and wondered what alternatives looked like when they came from a man who could make 3 dangerous men disappear with a few quiet words. 3 days after walking into the wrong VIP lounge, Zara Williams found herself holding Kim Tae-young's business card while staring at her final eviction notice. The hostess job at the main club had lasted exactly 1 shift before she quit, disgusted by the expectations that came with pouring drinks for men who thought her smile was included in the bottle service. Now she sat in her studio apartment, phone in one hand, card in the other, trying to decide if desperation had finally outweighed common sense. Kim Tae-young answered on the first ring, his voice carrying the same quiet authority she remembered. Miss Williams, he said, and she could hear the satisfaction in his tone. I wondered when you would call. The alternatives you mentioned, Zara began, then stopped. She had practiced this conversation a dozen times, but sitting here with her landlord's final warning and $36 in her checking account, the words felt inadequate. Our best discussed in person, Kim Tae-young finished. Are you available this evening? 2 hours later, Zara stood outside a restaurant in Itaewon that looked like it catered to Seoul's political and business elite. The hostess who greeted her spoke perfect English and seemed unsurprised when Zara mentioned Kim Tae-young's name. She was escorted through the main dining room, past tables where conversations were conducted in multiple languages over meals that cost more than her monthly rent, to a private dining room in the back. Kim Tae-young rose when she entered, and she was struck again by how his presence seemed to alter the space around him. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that fit him like it had been crafted by master tailors, which it probably had. His hair was styled with precision, not a strand out of place, and his dark eyes held the same calculating intensity that had made her pulse quicken 3 days ago. Everything about him spoke of money, power, and careful control, from his posture to the way he gestured for her to take the seat across from him. Thank you for coming, he said, settling back into his chair with fluid grace. You look tired, Miss Williams. It had been a very long week, Zara admitted. She had chosen her outfit carefully, the same professional dress from the interview. But sitting across from Kim Tae-young in his expensive suit, she felt the gulf between their circumstances like a physical weight. Financial stress has that effect, Kim Tae-young observed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than sympathetic. Tell me about your current situation. Leave nothing out. The directness of his request caught her off guard, but something about his steady gaze made evasion seem pointless. She found herself explaining everything. The failed job search, the dwindling savings, the eviction notice, her growing certainty that she was running out of time and options in a country where she had no safety net. Kim Tae-young listened without interruption, his dark eyes never leaving her face, taking in every detail with the focus of someone assessing a business proposition. And your family in America? He asked when she finished. What support can they provide? None, Zara said simply. My parents died in a car accident when I was 20. I came here because I had nothing tying me to the States, and everything to gain from international experience. Or so I thought. Kim Tae-young nodded as if this information confirmed something important. You are completely alone here, he said. No relatives, no significant relationships, no one who would immediately notice if your circumstances changed dramatically. The way he phrased it made her stomach tighten with unease. That sounds ominous, she said. It is practical, Kim Tae-young corrected. The work I have in mind requires discretion and flexibility. It also requires someone who can disappear from their current life without creating complications. Before Zara could ask what kind of work required disappearing from one's life, the private dining room door opened and 3 men entered. She recognized 2 of them immediately. They were the same predatory men who had confronted Kim Tae-young in the VIP lounge, the ones who had taken her picture. The third man was older, with graying hair and scars along his jawline that suggested a violent history. Kim Tae-young's entire demeanor shifted. The careful courtesy he had shown Zara vanished, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. His posture remained relaxed, but there was now a quality of controlled violence about him that made the air in the room feel charged with electricity. Gentlemen, he said in English, his voice carrying pleasant politeness that did not reach his eyes. You seem to have confused this establishment with one that tolerates uninvited guests. The older man stepped forward, his smile revealing gold teeth. We came to discuss the woman, he said in heavily accented English. The one who saw too much. Zara's blood turned cold as she realized they were talking about her. She was the complication Kim Tae-young had mentioned, the witness to something she did not understand. Her hands began to tremble, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. There is nothing to discuss, Kim Tae-young replied, still seated but radiating menace. Miss Williams is under my protection. Any interest you have in her is now my concern. Protection has a price, the older man said. Perhaps we can reach an arrangement. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Kim Tae-young rose from his chair with slow, deliberate movements, and Zara watched the 3 intruders take unconscious steps backward. He was not particularly tall or broad, but something about his controlled stillness made him seem infinitely more dangerous than men twice his size. Let me be very clear, Kim Tae-young said, his voice low and precise. Miss Williams is not for sale, not for trade, and not for negotiation. Your interest in her ends now, permanently. If you approach her again, if you photograph her again, if you so much as think about her again, I will consider it a declaration of war against my organization. Do you understand the consequences of war with Kim Tae-young? The older man's confident smile faltered. The 2 younger men shifted uncomfortably, their predatory confidence evaporating in the face of Kim Tae-young's deadly calm. Zara had never seen anyone project such absolute authority through stillness and quiet words, but the effect was unmistakable. These dangerous men were afraid of him. We understand, the older man said finally. No harm was intended. Good, Kim Tae-young replied. Then you will leave now, and you will forget Miss Williams exists. If I hear otherwise, our next conversation will be considerably less polite. The 3 men left quickly, their hurried exit a stark contrast to their aggressive entrance. When the door closed behind them, Kim Tae-young returned to his seat as if nothing had happened, but Zara noticed his eyes remained alert, tracking every sound from the hallway. Who were they? Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Competitors, Kim Tae-young said, the same answer he had given in the VIP lounge. They run gambling operations in Hongdae and have been expanding into territory that concerns my associates. And what do you do? Zara asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew the answer. I facilitate solutions to complex problems, Kim Tae-young replied. Sometimes those problems involve people who do not understand boundaries or respect agreements. Sometimes they involve people who have witnessed things that could compromise ongoing business relationships. Like me, Zara said. Like you, he confirmed. But also like you. Those problems can become opportunities if handled correctly. He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You walked into my world by accident, Miss Williams, but you handled yourself well under pressure. You did not panic when confronted by dangerous men. You did not attempt to bargain or beg. Most importantly, you have kept silent about what you witnessed, which suggests both intelligence and discretion. Those seemed like basic survival instincts, Zara said. Most people do not possess them, Kim Tae-young replied. Most people in your situation would have gone to the police or tried to use their knowledge as leverage. You did neither. Instead, you called me directly when your circumstances became desperate enough to require assistance. That shows both wisdom and pragmatism. Before Zara could respond, commotion erupted from the main dining room. Raised voices, the sound of chairs scraping against floor, someone shouting in Korean. Through the partially opened door, she caught glimpses of movement and heard what sounded like a confrontation escalating rapidly. Kim Tae-young was on his feet instantly, moving toward the door with fluid efficiency. Stay here, he commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. Do not leave this room under any circumstances. But as he reached the doorway, Zara saw something that made her heart stop. A man in a business suit had collapsed near one of the tables in the main dining room, his body convulsing. Other diners were backing away in alarm, but nobody was helping him. The man was clearly having some kind of medical emergency, possibly a seizure or heart attack, and everyone was too concerned with their own safety to assist. Without thinking, Zara pushed past Kim Tae-young and rushed into the main dining room. Her hands shook as she knelt beside the unconscious man, checking for a pulse and trying to remember her CPR training from college. The man's breathing was shallow and irregular, his face an alarming shade of gray. Call an ambulance, she shouted in Korean to the nearest waiter, then switched to English when he stared at her in confusion. Emergency services, now. She tilted the man's head back to clear his airway, checked for obstructions, and began rescue breathing. Around her, the dining room had gone silent except for the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She was vaguely aware of Kim Tae-young standing nearby, watching her with an expression she could not read, but her focus remained entirely on the unconscious man whose life might depend on her actions in the next few minutes. When the paramedics arrived 8 minutes later, the man was breathing more regularly and his color had improved. They took over his care with professional efficiency, loading him onto a stretcher and preparing for transport to the nearest hospital. Only then did Zara realize that her hands were shaking and her dress was stained with blood from where the man had bitten his tongue during the seizure. Kim Tae-young approached her as the paramedics departed, his dark eyes studying her face with renewed intensity. That was either very brave or very foolish, he said quietly. It was necessary, Zara replied, wiping her hands on a napkin someone had offered. Nobody else was helping him. No, Kim Tae-young agreed. They were not. But you risked your own safety to help a complete stranger, despite being in an unfamiliar environment surrounded by potential threats. That suggests something rare, Miss Williams. It suggests character. The way he said the word character made it sound like a valuable commodity, something that could be assessed and priced. Zara looked around the dining room, noting how the other patrons had returned to their meals as if nothing had happened, and wondered what kind of world Kim Tae-young inhabited where helping someone in medical distress was considered remarkable rather than expected. I think we should continue our conversation elsewhere, Kim Tae-young said, placing a hand on her elbow to guide her toward the exit. After tonight, I believe we have much to discuss regarding your future employment opportunities. As they left the restaurant, Zara caught sight of the 3 men from earlier watching from across the street. They had witnessed her actions in the dining room, seen her risk herself for a stranger, observed Kim Tae-young's reaction to her behavior. She was no longer just an accidental witness to their business. She was something more complicated now, something that warranted closer attention. Kim Tae-young noticed her gaze and followed it to where the men stood in the shadows. They will not approach you again, he said with quiet certainty. But they will remember what they saw tonight. You have become interesting, Miss Williams, and in my world, interesting people require very careful protection. The ride to Kim Tae-young's penthouse passed in tense silence, broken only by the soft hum of the luxury sedan's engine and the occasional crackle of his phone as he received updates in rapid Korean. Zara sat in the passenger seat, still wearing her bloodstained dress, watching Seoul's neon-lit streets blur past the tinted windows. Every few minutes, Kim Tae-young would glance in the rearview mirror, his dark eyes checking for signs they were being followed. The casual way he monitored for threats made her stomach clench with the growing realization of how serious her situation had become. When they pulled up to one of Gangnam's most exclusive residential towers, the kind with private security and underground parking, Zara felt the full weight of the class differential between them settle onto her shoulders. The building rose 40 stories into the Seoul skyline, all glass and steel and understated wealth. A doorman in pristine uniform emerged to open her door, greeting Kim Tae-young by name with the kind of deference reserved for people who could ruin lives with a phone call. Kim Tae-young's penthouse occupied the entire 40th floor, accessible only by private elevator that required a key card to activate. When the doors opened directly into his living space, Zara stepped into a world that belonged in architectural magazines rather than reality. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of the city below, the lights of Seoul spreading out like scattered diamonds against black velvet. The interior was a study in minimalist luxury, all clean lines and expensive materials, leather and marble and custom fixtures that probably cost more than she had ever earned in a year. The space was enormous, bigger than some houses, with different areas flowing seamlessly into each other without walls or barriers. A kitchen that looked like it belonged in a five-star restaurant occupied one corner, complete with professional-grade appliances and a wine collection that suggested serious money and sophisticated tastes. The furniture was sparse but perfect, each piece clearly chosen for both form and function, arranged to take advantage of the incredible view while maintaining sight lines to all entrances. "This is where you will be staying until the current situation is resolved," Kim Tae-young said, setting his keys on a marble console table. "The guest suite is through that hallway, fully furnished and stocked with everything you should need. A doctor will arrive shortly to examine you for any injuries from tonight's excitement." "I do not need a doctor," Zara protested, though her hands were still shaking slightly from adrenaline and shock. "You helped save a man's life tonight," Kim Tae-young replied, removing his suit jacket and hanging it with precise care. "Your stress response is normal, but I prefer to have medical confirmation that you are physically unharmed. Dr. Chun is discreet and thorough. She will also provide you with medication to help you sleep if necessary." The casual way he arranged for private medical care, as if having doctors make house calls was perfectly normal, reinforced just how different his world was from anything Zara had ever experienced. She wandered to the windows while they waited, looking out at the city lights and trying to process how quickly her life had shifted from desperate job hunting to whatever this was. Dr. Chun arrived 20 minutes later, a middle-aged Korean woman with kind eyes and professional demeanor who spoke excellent English. She examined Zara thoroughly but discreetly, checking for signs of injury or shock, taking her blood pressure and pulse, asking gentle questions about her stress levels and sleeping patterns. When she finished, she prescribed mild anti-anxiety medication and advised rest, speaking to Kim Tae-young in Korean before departing with the same efficiency with which she had arrived. After Dr. Chun left, Kim Tae-young poured himself a glass of wine and gestured for Zara to join him on the leather sofa facing the windows. "Now," he said, settling into his seat with fluid grace, "we can discuss your employment prospects in detail." "You said alternatives to conventional employment," Zara said, accepting the wine glass he offered. "What exactly are you proposing?" Kim Tae-young studied her face for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. "Miss Williams," he began, "my business operations require someone with your specific combination of skills and circumstances. You are intelligent, educated, bilingual, and culturally adaptable. More importantly, after tonight, you have demonstrated both discretion and moral courage under pressure. These qualities make you valuable in ways that traditional job descriptions cannot capture." He paused to sip his wine, letting her absorb this assessment before continuing. "I am prepared to offer you a position as my cultural liaison and interpreter for international business meetings. Your primary responsibility would be facilitating communication between my Korean associates and our English-speaking partners. You would also serve as my personal assistant for matters requiring cultural sensitivity or linguistic precision." The job description sounded almost legitimate, like something that might exist in a normal corporation. But the way Kim Tae-young presented it, with careful word choices and meaningful pauses, suggested layers of complexity that went far beyond translation services. "What kind of international business?" Zara asked. "Import-export operations," Kim Tae-young replied smoothly. "Real estate development. Investment opportunities in emerging markets. The kind of business that requires careful negotiation and absolute discretion." And the compensation? She asked, though she suspected the answer would be far beyond anything she had ever hoped to earn. $150,000 per year, Kim Tae-young said without hesitation. Paid monthly, tax-free, deposited directly to accounts I will establish for you. In addition, I will provide a luxury apartment in your name, all living expenses covered, and a clothing allowance appropriate to your new position. Your student loans will be paid in full within 60 days. Any medical expenses will be covered completely. Zara felt her wine glass slip in her suddenly nerveless fingers. $150,000 was more money than she had ever imagined earning, enough to transform her entire life overnight. The offer was so generous it bordered on unbelievable, which meant there had to be significant strings attached. What would you expect in return? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Absolute loyalty, Kim Tae-young replied, his tone becoming more formal. Complete discretion regarding everything you see, hear, or experience while in my employ. You would live according to my security requirements, travel when and where I determine necessary, and conduct yourself in a manner that reflects well on my organization at all times. He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You would report directly and exclusively to me. You would not discuss your work with anyone outside my organization, ever. You would not maintain relationships that could compromise your position or create conflicts of interest. In all matters related to your employment, my word would be final and non-negotiable. The terms he was describing sounded less like a job and more like voluntary imprisonment, albeit in a very expensive cage. Zara set down her wine glass and tried to organize her thoughts around the magnitude of what he was offering and what he was demanding in return. And if I wanted to quit, she asked. If I decided this was not the right fit? Kim Tae-young's expression grew more serious, his voice taking on a quality that reminded her of winter mornings and sharp edges. Miss Williams, given what you have witnessed and what you would learn in this position, quitting would not be a simple matter of submitting 2 weeks' notice. My business requires long-term commitments from people in positions of trust. Betrayal or abandonment would have serious consequences, both for you and for people who depend on operational security. He did not elaborate on what those consequences might entail, but something in his tone suggested they would be permanent and irreversible. Zara thought about the men who had confronted them earlier, the casual efficiency with which Kim Tae-young had made them disappear, the underlying current of violence that seemed to permeate everything despite the expensive trappings. You are asking me to trade my freedom for financial security, she said slowly. I am offering you protection, purpose, and prosperity in exchange for loyalty and discretion, Kim Tae-young corrected. Your current freedom consists of unemployment, eviction, and vulnerability to people who consider you a liability. The freedom I am offering includes safety, resources, and the opportunity to build something meaningful. Zara stood and walked back to the windows, looking out at the city lights while her mind raced through the implications. She thought about the eviction notice in her purse, her empty bank account, the growing certainty that she was running out of options. She thought about the way Kim Tae-young had protected her from the dangerous men, the casual authority with which he commanded respect and fear, the resources he could bring to bear on any problem. She also thought about the blood on her dress from helping a stranger, the way Kim Tae-young's eyes had sharpened when he witnessed her actions, his assessment that character was a rare and valuable commodity. If she accepted his offer, she would be stepping into a world where moral lines were blurred and conventional rules did not apply. But she would also be stepping away from poverty, desperation, and the constant fear of having nowhere to turn when circumstances became impossible. How long do I have to decide? She asked without turning around. 24 hours, Kim Tae-young replied. After that, the offer expires and alternative arrangements will need to be made for your safety. The way he phrased it made clear that alternative arrangements might not be nearly as comfortable or voluntary as the current proposal. Zara remained at the windows for several more minutes, watching the city lights blur as her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. When she finally turned back to face Kim Tae-young, she found him watching her with patient intensity, as if her decision was important but not surprising. If I accept, she said carefully, when would this arrangement begin? Immediately, Kim Tae-young replied. Tonight, if necessary. Your old life would end completely, and your new life would begin under my protection and guidance. Zara thought about her tiny studio apartment with its chipped linoleum and buzzing fluorescent lights, her empty refrigerator and overdue bills, the growing desperation that had driven her to call his number in the first place. She thought about the alternative, about trying to navigate Seoul's job market while being hunted by men who considered her a threat to their business operations. Maybe morality was a luxury she could no longer afford. Maybe survival required accepting help from sources that conventional wisdom would reject. Maybe the choice between right and wrong was less important than the choice between safety and danger. "I accept," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was committing to. "Whatever this arrangement entails, Mr. Kim, I accept your terms." 3 months after accepting Kim Tae-young's proposition, Zara Williams woke up in a bed that cost more than her previous yearly rent, in an apartment that overlooked Han River from the 32nd floor, wearing silk pajamas that had been tailored specifically for her measurements. The eviction notices and empty bank accounts felt like memories from someone else's life, distant and unreal compared to the security that now surrounded every aspect of her existence. Her new apartment was a study in understated luxury, located in the same exclusive building as Kim Tae-young's penthouse, but 4 floors down, giving her privacy while maintaining proximity for security purposes. Everything had been chosen with meticulous attention to her preferences, from the warm color palette that complemented her complexion to the extensive library filled with books in both English and Korean. The refrigerator was always stocked, the bills were always paid, and her closet contained clothing that made her feel elegant and confident rather than desperate and out of place. More importantly, she had discovered that she was genuinely gifted at the cultural liaison work Kim Tae-young had described. Her business degree and natural linguistic abilities made her invaluable during international negotiations, where her ability to explain cultural nuances and translate not just language, but intent had prevented several potentially costly misunderstandings. The Korean business executives who worked with Kim Tae-young treated her with respect that bordered on deference, recognizing that her insights could mean the difference between successful deals and expensive failures. The work itself existed in a gray area that she had learned not to examine too closely. Import-export operations that required unusual levels of security and discretion. Real estate developments that happened quickly and quietly without the typical regulatory delays. Investment opportunities that generated remarkable returns through channels that were never quite explained in detail. Zara had become adept at facilitating these conversations without asking questions that would require answers she was not prepared to hear. Kim Tae-young had proven to be a demanding but fair employer, setting high standards for her work while providing the resources and support necessary to meet those expectations. He was meticulous about her safety, insisting on security escorts for any travel outside predetermined safe zones. But he was also surprisingly considerate about her comfort and preferences. When she mentioned missing certain American foods, they appeared in her kitchen the next day. When she expressed interest in continuing her Korean language studies, he arranged for private tutoring with one of Seoul's most respected professors. Their working relationship had evolved into something that felt almost like partnership, built on mutual respect and professional competence. Kim Tae-young consulted her opinion on matters extending beyond pure translation, asking for her perspective on negotiations, her assessment of potential partners, her recommendations for approaches that might be more effective with Western business culture. She had earned his trust through consistent reliability and careful discretion, never discussing their work outside his presence, never compromising operational security through careless words or actions. But it was the domestic moments that had surprised her most. Kim Tae-young worked long hours and traveled frequently, but when he was in Seoul, he often invited her to share meals in his penthouse rather than eating alone in her apartment. These dinners had started as professional debriefs, discussions about upcoming meetings, or cultural considerations for new business relationships. Gradually, they had evolved into something more personal, conversations that ranged from literature to philosophy to their different perspectives on Korean and American society. Zara had discovered that beneath Kim Tae-young's controlled exterior lay a sharp intellect and unexpected warmth. He was well-read, spoke 4 languages fluently, and possessed a dry sense of humor that emerged during their private conversations. He asked thoughtful questions about her background and opinions, listening to her responses with the kind of focused attention that made her feel like her thoughts actually mattered. When she cooked dinner in her apartment, experimenting with Korean recipes, he would sometimes appear at her door with wine and an offer to help, proving surprisingly competent in the kitchen for someone who could afford private chefs. These domestic interludes felt dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with his criminal associations and everything to do with the growing attraction she was trying desperately to ignore. Kim Tae-young was magnetic in ways that went beyond his obvious power and wealth. The way he moved through space with fluid confidence, the way his rare smiles transformed his entire face, the way he listened to her opinions as if they carried real weight in his decision-making process. She found herself looking forward to their evenings together with an intensity that had nothing to do with professional obligation and everything to do with genuine affection. One evening in late autumn, as they shared wine and conversation in his penthouse after a particularly successful business meeting, Zara finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her for weeks. "Why did you really choose me for this position?" she asked, setting down her wine glass and turning to face him directly. "You could have hired someone with more experience, better connections, stronger language skills. What made you think I was worth such a significant investment?" Kim Tae-young was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face as if weighing how much truth she could handle. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she had never heard before, something raw and vulnerable beneath his usual controlled composure. "I had a sister," he said simply, "younger than me by 5 years. Her name was Kim Soo-jin, and she was everything good that I am not. Kind, trusting, generous to a fault. She believed in people even when they disappointed her. She saw beauty in situations where I saw only problems to be solved." He paused to sip his wine, but Zara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he continued. "When I was building my business operations, expanding from local to international markets, I was completely focused on growth and power. I worked 18-hour days, traveled constantly, treated relationships as transactions to be optimized rather than connections to be nurtured. Soo-jin would call me, invite me to dinner, ask me to meet her friends. I was always too busy, always had more important things to handle." Kim Tae-young set down his wine glass and moved to the windows, his reflection overlapping with the Seoul skyline beyond the glass. "She met a man," he continued, his voice becoming quieter, more controlled. "Park Jin-won. He seemed perfect for her. Educated, charming, from a good family. I approved of the relationship because it meant she would be settled and I could focus entirely on business without worrying about her welfare." The silence that followed felt heavy with grief and regret. Zara remained on the sofa, giving him space to continue at his own pace, sensing that this story was leading somewhere dark and personal. "Park Jin-won was not what he appeared to be," Kim Tae-young said finally. "He was controlling, possessive, increasingly violent. He isolated Soo-jin from her friends, convinced her that her family did not understand their relationship, made her believe that his jealousy was proof of his love. By the time I realized what was happening, she was already completely under his influence." He turned from the windows to face her, and Zara was shocked to see tears threatening in his dark eyes. "I tried to intervene when I finally understood the situation, but she defended him, insisted that I was wrong about his character. She had been conditioned to protect him, to believe that his violence was her fault, that leaving him would prove she was ungrateful for his devotion. The last conversation we had, she begged me to give Park Jin-won a chance, to see past my prejudices and recognize how much he loved her." Zara felt her heart break for the pain in his voice, the guilt that had clearly haunted him for years. "What happened to her?" she asked gently. "Park Jin-won killed her," Kim Tae-young said, the words falling like stones into still water. "During an argument about money. He claimed it was an accident, that he had only meant to frighten her. But the medical examiner found evidence of previous injuries, patterns of abuse that had escalated over months. She had been suffering, and I had been too busy building my empire to notice that my own sister was dying slowly in front of me." The raw grief in his voice made Zara's chest tighten with sympathy. She rose from the sofa and moved to where he stood by the windows, close enough to offer comfort, but not so close as to intrude on his emotional space. "I am so sorry," she said softly. "That must have been devastating for you." Kim Tae-young looked at her with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and pain. "It changed everything about how I view my responsibilities," he said. "I realized that all the power and wealth I had accumulated meant nothing if I could not protect the people who mattered most to me. I swore that I would never again ignore when someone was in danger, never again prioritize business over the welfare of people under my care." He reached out and touched her hand, his fingers warm against her skin. "When I saw you that first night, with bruises you were trying to hide and fear you were trying to overcome, you reminded me of Soo-jin. But when I watched you save that man in the restaurant, risk your own safety to help a stranger, I realized you possessed something she never developed. You had strength, courage, the ability to take action when others froze. You were what she might have become if someone had protected her properly, given her the security to grow into her full potential." The intensity of his gaze made Zara's pulse quicken, but this time it was not from fear or uncertainty. It was from the recognition that somewhere in the last 3 months, her gratitude had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. She cared about this man, not just as her protector or employer, but as someone whose pain mattered to her, whose happiness had become intertwined with her own. "You saved me," she said quietly, "not just from those men or from poverty, but from believing that I had no value, no purpose beyond survival. And you saved me," Kim Tae-young replied, his thumb tracing across her knuckles in a gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. "From believing that caring about someone was a weakness I could not afford." The moment stretched between them, charged with the recognition of feelings that could no longer be dismissed as professional appreciation or grateful obligation. When Kim Tae-young stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell his expensive cologne mixed with something that was uniquely him, Zara did not pull away. "You should know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that my feelings for you have become quite unprofessional." "Good," Kim Tae-young murmured, his free hand rising to cup her cheek with surprising tenderness. "Because mine for you stopped being professional months ago." When he leaned down to brush his lips against hers, soft and questioning rather than demanding, Zara felt the last of her emotional barriers crumble completely. This was no longer about gratitude or obligation or survival. This was about two damaged people who had found healing in each other, protection that had evolved into genuine affection, a business arrangement that had become something neither of them had expected but both desperately needed. 2 weeks after their first kiss, Zara began noticing things that made her skin crawl with unease. Phone calls that disconnected the moment she answered. The same black sedan parked across from her building 3 days in a row. A delivery man who asked too many questions about her schedule while bringing flowers she had not ordered. The feeling of being watched that followed her through Seoul's crowded streets like a persistent shadow. Kim Tae-young had taught her to trust her instincts, to recognize the subtle signs that indicated when normal life was shifting into something more dangerous. He had also arranged for her to receive self-defense training from his security team, practical skills disguised as fitness sessions that taught her how to recognize threats, create opportunities for escape, and buy time until help could arrive. What he had not prepared her for was how terrifying it would be to realize that all those precautions were about to become necessary. The morning it happened, Zara was returning from her weekly shopping trip to the international market in Itaewon, her arms full of groceries for the dinner she planned to cook for Kim Tae-young that evening. He had been traveling for 5 days, handling business in Hong Kong, and she had been counting the hours until his return with an intensity that surprised her. Their relationship had deepened considerably since the night he shared his sister's story, moving from stolen kisses and careful touches to sleeping in each other's arms, to conversations about futures that extended far beyond their original business arrangement. She was thinking about the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the warmth of his hands against her skin, the quiet contentment she felt when they were together, when the black van pulled up beside her on the quiet side street near her building. The doors opened before she could react, and 3 men emerged with the fluid efficiency of professionals who had done this many times before. "Run," her brain screamed, but her body froze as she recognized the predatory confidence in their movements. These were not random criminals looking for easy targets. These were specialists, sent specifically for her, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested extensive planning and preparation. Miss Williams, the leader said in accented English, his smile revealing gold teeth she remembered from the restaurant confrontation months ago. You will come with us quietly, or this will become unpleasant for everyone nearby. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs as she calculated her options. The street was mostly empty, with only a few elderly shoppers visible in the distance. Her building's security entrance was 50 meters away, close enough to reach if she could create enough of a distraction to break their formation. The self-defense training Kim Tae-young had insisted upon suddenly felt inadequate against professionals who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. I do not think so, she said, dropping her grocery bags and backing toward a narrow alley that might provide an escape route. The men moved to flank her, cutting off her retreat with practiced efficiency. The leader stepped closer, his confidence absolute. Kim Tae-young is not here to protect you, Miss Williams. And my employers have decided that you represent too valuable an asset to remain in his possession. Terror flooded through Zara's system, cold and sharp and paralyzing. These men intended to kidnap her, to use her as leverage against Kim Tae-young or sell her to whoever had hired them. She thought about the stories he had shared about his sister, the violence that existed just beneath the surface of his carefully controlled world, the enemies who would not hesitate to hurt innocent people to achieve their goals. Her phone was in her purse, but reaching for it would signal her intentions and give them reason to move faster. Instead, she took another step backward and deliberately tripped over her own feet, falling hard onto the concrete sidewalk. The impact sent shock through her elbows and knees, but it also created the moment of confusion she needed. Help! She screamed in Korean as loudly as she could manage. Kidnapping! Call police! Help me! The leader cursed and lunged forward, but Zara rolled away from his grasp and scrambled to her feet, adrenaline giving her speed and agility she did not know she possessed. She sprinted toward the alley, hoping to reach the busier street beyond where witnesses might deter them from continuing their pursuit. Behind her, she heard running footsteps and angry voices as the men gave chase. The alley was narrow and cluttered with delivery boxes and maintenance equipment, obstacles she had to navigate while running at full speed. Her lungs burned and her legs shook with exhaustion and terror, but she forced herself to keep moving, knowing that stopping meant capture or worse. She had almost reached the street when strong hands grabbed her shoulders and yanked her backward. The leader of the kidnapping team wrapped an arm around her throat, cutting off her air supply, while his companions moved to block any escape routes. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision as she struggled against his grip, her self-defense training finally kicking in as she drove her elbow into his solar plexus with all the force she could muster. The man grunted and loosened his hold enough for her to break free, but now all three men were between her and the street. She backed against the alley wall, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath, her mind racing through options that all seemed to end with capture or death. That was when she heard the sound of multiple vehicles arriving at high speed, doors slamming, and voices shouting orders in Korean. The kidnapping team heard it too, their confident expressions shifting to concern as they realized their careful plan was falling apart. Kim Tae-young appeared at the mouth of the alley like an avenging angel, flanked by 6 men in dark suits who moved with military precision. His face was a mask of cold fury that made the air itself seem to crackle with danger. He was dressed for travel, still wearing the expensive coat he had worn to the airport, but there was nothing civilized about his expression as he assessed the situation. "Zara," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Come here. Now." She ran to him without hesitation, her legs shaking so badly she nearly collapsed when he caught her in his arms. The warmth and strength of his embrace felt like safety itself after the terror of the last few minutes, and she buried her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent and trying to stop trembling. The 3 men who had tried to kidnap her were now surrounded by Kim Tae-young's security team, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. The leader attempted to maintain his composure, but Zara could see fear creeping into his eyes as he realized how completely the situation had shifted. "This is a misunderstanding," he said in English, his gold tooth gleaming as he tried to smile. "We meant no harm to your woman." Kim Tae-young's voice, when he responded, was so cold it made Zara shiver despite the warmth of his arms around her. "You put your hands on what belongs to me," he said quietly. "You threatened someone under my protection. You caused her to fear for her life. There is no misunderstanding here." He looked down at Zara, his expression softening fractionally as he examined her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands gentle as they checked her scraped elbows and knees. "No," Zara managed, though her voice was shaking almost as much as her hands. "They said their employers wanted to use me as leverage against you." Kim Tae-young's jaw tightened, and when he looked back at the captured men, his eyes held the kind of cold calculation that promised permanent consequences. "Take them," he said to his security team. "I want to know who sent them, who they have been reporting to, and what organization thought they could touch my woman without facing the consequences." As his men efficiently secured the would-be kidnappers, Kim Tae-young guided Zara toward his car with protective care. Once they were safely inside the vehicle, with bulletproof glass between them and the rest of the world, she finally allowed herself to break down completely. The terror she had been holding back during the confrontation flooded through her system, leaving her sobbing against Kim Tae-young's shoulder while he stroked her hair and murmured reassurances in Korean. "I was so scared," she whispered when she could finally speak. "They knew exactly where to find me, exactly when I would be vulnerable. How long have they been watching me?" "Too long," Kim Tae-young replied, his voice tight with fury. "Long enough to plan a professional extraction. Long enough to know your routines and identify your weaknesses. This was not a spontaneous crime of opportunity. This was a calculated attack on my organization, using you as the target." The implications of what he was saying settled over Zara like ice water. She had become a liability not just to herself, but to him, a weakness that his enemies could exploit to cause him serious damage. The comfortable life they had built together, the growing intimacy and affection, all of it was overshadowed by the reality that caring about her made him vulnerable in ways that could destroy everything he had worked to build. "I should leave," she said quietly. "Go back to the States, disappear completely. As long as I am here, they will keep trying to use me against you." Kim Tae-young turned to face her fully, his dark eyes blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are not leaving," he said firmly. "You are not running away from this, and you are not sacrificing yourself for my convenience. The men who tried to take you today will not have the opportunity to try again, ever." There was something final and deadly in his tone that made it clear he was not talking about increased security measures or relocation to a safer city. He was talking about permanently eliminating the threat, using methods that would ensure his enemies understood the cost of targeting people under his protection. "What are you going to do?" Zara asked, though part of her did not want to know the answer. "What I should have done months ago," Kim Tae-young replied. "I am going to make it clear to everyone in Seoul's criminal underworld that you are not a weakness to be exploited. You are my strength, my future, and attempting to harm you is equivalent to declaring war on me personally." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the violence in his words. "I need you to understand something, Zara. This is not just about business arrangements or protection agreements anymore. You are not my employee or my responsibility. You are the woman I love, and I will burn down this entire city before I let anyone take you away from me." The raw emotion in his voice, the absolute certainty with which he claimed her, made Zara's heart race for entirely different reasons than fear. This dangerous man who controlled Seoul's shadows, who could make enemies disappear with a phone call, who commanded respect and terror in equal measure, loved her. Not just as a convenient companion or beautiful accessory, but as someone essential to his happiness, worth any risk or sacrifice to protect. "I love you too," she whispered, reaching up to trace the sharp line of his cheekbone with her fingertips. "Even knowing what you are, what you do, what loving you means. I choose this life, and I choose you." When Kim Tae-young kissed her this time, it was with the desperation of someone who had almost lost everything that mattered. And when Zara kissed him back, it was with the full knowledge that she was committing herself not just to him but to his world, with all its darkness and danger and moral complexity. 24 hours after the kidnapping attempt, Kim Tae-young returned to his penthouse with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had permanently resolved a complex problem. Zara was waiting for him in the living room, curled up on the leather sofa with a book she was not really reading, her attention focused entirely on listening for the sound of his key in the lock. When he entered, she could see immediately that something fundamental had shifted in his demeanor. The controlled tension he had carried for months was gone, replaced by an air of absolute certainty that made him seem even more dangerous and powerful than before. "Is it finished?" she asked, setting aside her book and rising to meet him. "Completely," Kim Tae-young replied, removing his coat with precise movements. "The organization that hired those men has been disbanded. Their leadership has retired permanently from all business activities. Their assets have been redistributed to parties who understand the importance of respecting boundaries. There will be no further attempts on your safety, now or ever." The way he phrased it made clear that disbanded and retired were euphemisms for something far more final and irreversible. Zara might have been horrified by the implications a year ago, but 3 months of living in Kim Tae-young's world had taught her that some problems could only be solved through methods that conventional society would never sanction. The men who had tried to kidnap her, who had threatened to sell her to the highest bidder, who had made her fear for her life in broad daylight, no longer existed as a concern for anyone. "Good," she said simply, and meant it with a conviction that surprised her. Kim Tae-young studied her face carefully, searching for signs of disgust or moral judgment that never came. Instead, he found acceptance, relief, and something deeper that made his dark eyes soften with genuine emotion. "You are not disturbed by what I had to do to ensure your safety," he said, more statement than question. "I am grateful," Zara replied honestly. "Those men would have tortured or killed me to hurt you. You protected me the only way that would guarantee my permanent safety. I understand the necessity, and I accept the consequences." The relief that crossed Kim Tae-young's features was so profound it made her chest tighten with emotion. He had been prepared for her to recoil from the violence he was capable of, to demand moral justifications he could not provide, to retreat from the darkness that was an inextricable part of his world. Instead, she had chosen to trust his judgment and accept his protection in all its forms. He crossed the room to where she stood and pulled her into his arms with desperate intensity, holding her close enough to feel her heartbeat against his chest, breathing in the scent of her hair as if trying to convince himself she was truly safe. When he pulled back to look at her face, his expression was raw with emotion that had nothing to do with business arrangements or professional obligations. "You are mine," he said quietly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Not my employee, not someone under my protection, not a convenient companion. Mine. Completely and irrevocably mine." The possessive certainty in his tone should have alarmed her, but instead it made warmth flood through her entire system. This dangerous man who could reshape Seoul's criminal landscape with a phone call, who commanded fear and respect from some of the city's most powerful people, who had just eliminated an entire organization to ensure her safety, was claiming her with the kind of desperate intensity that left no room for doubt or negotiation. "I am yours," Zara agreed, reaching up to trace the sharp line of his jaw with her fingertips. "And you are mine, Kim Tae-young." Broken pieces, dangerous edges, and all. When he kissed her this time, it was with the fierce hunger of someone claiming what belonged to him. And when she kissed him back, it was with the complete surrender of someone who had found exactly where she belonged. They made love with an intensity born of crisis survived and commitment acknowledged, their bodies speaking the same language of possession and devotion that their words had already established. Afterward, as they lay entwined in his enormous bed with Seoul's lights glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Kim Tae-young traced patterns across her bare shoulder and spoke quietly about the future he wanted to build with her. "I want you to be my wife," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Not just my lover or my companion, but my legal partner in everything I have built. I want to give you my name, my protection, and my complete devotion for the rest of our lives." Zara turned in his arms to face him fully, studying his expression in the dim light filtering through the windows. Marriage to Kim Tae-young would mean accepting his world completely, becoming an official part of his organization, sharing in both the benefits and the risks that came with his power and wealth. It would also mean love, security, and the kind of partnership she had never imagined possible. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I want to be your wife, Kim Tae-young. I want our future together, whatever it looks like." The smile that transformed his face was radiant with genuine joy, erasing years of careful control and revealing the man beneath the dangerous exterior. He reached into the nightstand beside his bed and withdrew a small velvet box that made Zara's breath catch in her throat. Inside was a ring that was both elegant and substantial, a perfect diamond surrounded by smaller stones in a setting that managed to be both timeless and distinctly modern. "I had this made for you 3 weeks ago," Kim Tae-young admitted as he slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. "Before the kidnapping attempt, before the crisis, when I realized that my feelings for you had moved far beyond anything I had expected or planned for. I have been waiting for the right moment to ask, but yesterday made me understand that the right moment is any moment when we are together and safe." The ring fit perfectly, catching the light from the windows and throwing sparkles across the ceiling like scattered stars. Zara stared at it in wonder, still amazed by how completely her life had transformed from desperate job hunting to planning a wedding with Seoul's most powerful criminal. The next morning, Kim Tae-young presented her with a folder of legal documents that made her financial security absolute and irrevocable. He had transferred ownership of 3 legitimate businesses into her name, including a successful import company, a luxury hotel, and a chain of high-end restaurants. The combined value of these assets was more money than she had ever imagined possessing, enough to ensure her independence and comfort for multiple lifetimes. "These businesses are clean," he explained as they reviewed the paperwork together over breakfast. "Completely legal, fully documented, generating substantial profits through legitimate operations. They are yours whether you marry me or not, whether you stay in Korea or return to America, whether something happens to me or we live together until we are old and gray. Your financial security is now completely independent of your relationship with me." "Why?" Zara asked, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his gesture. "Because I never want you to stay with me out of necessity," Kim Tae-young replied. "I want you to choose me every day because you love me, not because you need my protection or my money. I want our marriage to be based on mutual devotion rather than mutual dependence." 2 weeks later, Zara met Kim Tae-young's remaining family at a private dinner in his penthouse. His elderly uncle, the family patriarch who had helped raise him after his parents died, examined her with shrewd eyes before declaring his approval in a mixture of Korean and broken English. His cousin's wife, a gentle woman who managed the legitimate side of the family businesses, welcomed Zara with genuine warmth and offered to help plan their wedding. His nephew, a university student studying international business, peppered her with questions about American culture and expressed relief that his uncle had found someone who could match his intelligence and strength of character. The acceptance she received from Kim Tae-young's family felt like the final piece of her integration into his world. These people understood exactly what he was and what he did, but they also saw the man beneath the dangerous exterior, the person who valued loyalty and love above power and profit. They welcomed her not despite her relationship with Kim Tae-young, but because of it, recognizing that she had become essential to his happiness in ways that went far beyond business or convenience. Their wedding took place on a private island off the coast of Jeju, surrounded by 36 guests who represented the intersection of legitimate business and carefully managed criminal enterprise. Zara wore a custom gown that made her feel like royalty, and Kim Tae-young wore a traditional Korean outfit for the ceremony, followed by a midnight black tuxedo for the reception. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and protect each other through whatever challenges their unusual life might bring, there was not a dry eye among their guests. 6 months after their wedding, as autumn settled over Seoul in shades of gold and crimson, Zara sat in the study of their shared penthouse preparing for a video conference with potential business partners in Los Angeles. She was now the official head of international operations for Kim Tae-young's legitimate enterprises, a position that utilized her cultural expertise and business education while keeping her completely removed from the darker aspects of his organization. Her desk was positioned to take advantage of the incredible city view, and her office was decorated with photographs from their honeymoon in New Zealand, art pieces they had chosen together during trips to galleries and museums, books in multiple languages that reflected their shared intellectual interests. The life she had built with Kim Tae-young was rich with purpose and contentment, filled with work that challenged her mind and a relationship that nourished her soul. Kim Tae-young appeared in the doorway of her study carrying 2 cups of coffee, still wearing the expensive suit he had worn to morning meetings, but with his tie loosened and his shirt sleeves rolled up. He had just returned from resolving a territorial dispute between 2 minor organizations, a problem that had been solved through negotiation and careful application of his reputation rather than violence. As his influence had grown and stabilized, he had been able to resolve most conflicts through the mere threat of his involvement rather than actual action. "How did the conference call go?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk and offering her one of the coffee cups. "Very well," Zara replied, accepting the coffee and savoring the perfect balance of cream and sugar that he always remembered. "The Los Angeles group wants to expand into Korean markets, and we can provide the cultural expertise and local connections they need. It should be a profitable partnership for everyone involved." Kim Tae-young smiled with genuine pride in her accomplishments, his dark eyes warm with love and admiration. "You have become indispensable, Mrs. Kim," he said, "not just to me personally, but to our entire operation. Your insights and connections have opened opportunities one never could have accessed alone." "Mrs. Kim," Zara repeated, still feeling a thrill of satisfaction when he used her married name. A year ago, she had been desperate and unemployed, facing eviction and running out of options in a foreign country. Now she was the wife of one of Seoul's most powerful men, the head of multiple successful businesses, and a woman who woke up every morning knowing she was loved completely and protected absolutely. As evenings settled over the city and they prepared for another quiet dinner together, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her from that wrong turn into a VIP lounge to this life of security and love. The moral compromises had been real, the dangers had been genuine, and the choices had been difficult. But sitting across from Kim Tae-young at their dining table, watching the way his face softened when he looked at her, feeling the steady warmth of his devotion surrounding her like armor against the world's uncertainties, she knew she had chosen correctly. She was no longer the desperate woman who had walked into the wrong room and caught the attention of a dangerous man. She was Kim Zara, wife and partner and equal, loved and cherished and protected by someone who would burn down the world before letting anyone harm her. She was home.